Hello and welcome to the Business of the Business podcast. I'm your co-host JP John Paz from the Two Man Power Trip, and of course, joining me is pro wrestling's financial genius himself, Mr. Lavi Markland. Lavi, how you doing today, sir?
Hey John, I'm doing good in a post Royal Rumble world after I ordered it on the traditional pay-per-view. My 8-year-old was fascinated by the idea of pay-per-view. He had to report to my wife that I spent $45 on it, but it was a good time. I'm a Royal Rumble fan.
I didn't really realize they still did the traditional. Is it through what's the provider?
Optimum, which
Oh,
was
okay.
traditionally Cablevision, the Dolans. I was going to say they used to own, but I think they still do own Madison Square Garden.
Yep. Interesting. Very, very interesting. So, as far as wrestling is concerned and the wrestling news, why don't we start off with a little TNA? What's going on with Total Nonstop Action Wrestling?
Yeah, always a little bit controversial to to talk TNA more, perhaps on Twitter than those spending the time to listen, but it always gets a reaction. One thing I wanted to reflect back on a little bit from our conversation last week with Mr. John Wall Street in discussing, the number of TNA followers, and we'll have some of that stats later, thanks to Brandon Thurston. But engagements in their posts really emphasizing that TNA doesn't have fans; they have watchers. When we think about followers of their news, so starting it out a little bit hot with the controversy, but I think a big win this week, however, for TNA was having the Jordan Grace on in the Royal Rumble, and really not just there. Sometimes you have people flow through, like as a longtime Royal Rumble watcher, like Doug Gilbert was there, but
Yeah.
didn't make an impact. But Jordan Grace really made an impact and looked like set up some potential, depending on politics and so on, some potential matchups for the future. Really getting a wonderful spotlight, and I think really a win-win. We know that WWE has worked with TNA before, in terms of having even knockouts appear. Of course, Mickey James comes to mind first in the Royal
Yep.
Rumble a couple of years ago. But one has to think about Endeavor being the parent company of TKO, and they're now hosting via their platform and technology TNA streaming service. So bringing a buzzworthy TNA talent onto the show is a really smart move, and I think this is the right talent. I think, not to paint everyone with a brush, but I think some of the male talent is somewhat controversial that they spotlight, and partly the reason why some are not in WWE or AEW. Certainly not saying everyone, and some of their talent also has been through the ringer a little bit and spotlighted before, and they're doing the best they can with it. But their knockouts division, especially somebody like Jordan Grace, she has a lot of buzz online. I'm not sure if I've ever seen a match of hers, but she's just an interesting follow on X, and always in the news, and seems like a lot of positive energy with maybe an errant tweet referring to Chris Benoit at a certain time that she had taken back, I believe, and then sort of running afoul of Jim Cornette, but actually Cornette very rarely sort of taking it back and sort of acknowledging that she's cool. But I think a really smart move to see Jordan Grace in the Royal Rumble. What did you think when she came out there?
I was pretty surprised, although I read online that a former TNA champion was going to be a knockout. I didn't know they meant the current champion. I thought they meant like somebody from the past that maybe like Mickey James or something. So I was pretty surprised, and they gave her a long time. I mean, she was in there for what 25 minutes. So I mean, they gave her a nice little push.
Yeah, so looking forward to her coming back to WWE if that works out, or maybe some talent migrating over to TNA. I think certainly with WWE and its history of using talent from other promotions, it's a little spotty. Yeah. But I think in this case, so far, it's off to a good start. Now, Eventbrite gifted us with a little bit of data that was quite interesting, I would say. Um, so when I went to Eventbrite's TNA page, or what's still called Impact, actually a little bit of a while, probably to change that over if they can. So it has had 17,000 attendees hosted. So to me, that meant, based on their past events, which was 79 events on Eventbrite, and I didn't go through it one by one. So this could include something like a meet and greet. Anything that has its own separate sales page would be considered an event. They're not thinking about, whether it's a live event or whatever it is. And again, this doesn't include everything. So it doesn't include Ticketmaster sales. Of course, they had a big win in Vegas. But when we put 17,079 events, that comes out to an average of 215 events per person. This goes back to Eventbrite listings from October 2018 all the way to the end of January of 2024. So 215 events per person, which was interesting because when I was looking at Impact's numbers, as it was called then, a lot closer, maybe a year and a half ago on onlineclubjobsearch.com, I came up with an average that was basically about the same, if not the same, a little bit over 200. So it was good to see that reinforced. So Barry Horowitz to me. But again, of course, the average would probably be a little bit higher, of course, when you factor in something like Vegas shows. But I think that gives us a good sense of like what's the average or maybe median TNA show. You could say a little bit over 200 people.
Now, as far as where to watch it, they're pretty much in a lot of different places, and all over the globe, all over the world. They're in a lot of different places to availability wise.
So in creating a graphic, and of course, when you have a graphic that's supposed to pop, it would be hard, like if it looked like those old time listings where you'd be like, where's WCW Worldwide air? And it would show like
Yes,
130
yes,
markets.
yes.
But it just goes to show like sort of a priority of at least the people that they expect to see this graphic. And of course, understanding that it's an English graphic, so that might factor in a little bit too. But it shows TNA Impact, of course, USA, Access TV, Canada, Fight Network, which Anthem owns as well. In the world, The Zone, as you've taught me the pronunciation, streaming on their TNA Insiders platform on YouTube, which I almost forgot about, and then the TNA Plus app. And of course, recently they announced a return of Explosion, which is Fridays where it premieres on TNA Plus, and then on YouTube premiere on Tuesday. So just staying there a moment before we get into everywhere that TNA airs. I think returning Explosion is sort of like it's just like you have a cost of doing business, right? You're taping whether it's pay-per-views or television shows, and Explosion is just an hour a week, which also would include advertising of some sort. Perhaps not because of how it airs, but let's say it's an hour show, so it's really just maybe 4 matches maximum, and you have some recap elements as well. And it's it's content for people who are super fans that give them another reason to continue subscribing to TNA Plus. And then YouTube, they do quite well, and so it's some fresh content. And when you think about at the time how it worked for AEW, Dark, it's a good way of discovering talent. You could use local talents for, not to speak of the physicality of matches, but for the most part, it seems to be okay to ask talent to work another match in the same evening. It's not a foreign concept to most talents, so you wouldn't even necessarily have to book that many additional talent, and an extra hour or 45 minutes isn't much. But when people try to do multiple hours of tapings, you could certainly wear out an audience. But just according to TNA's website, just getting a sense of their full distribution picture as far as we have it here. So again, we know in the USA, Access TV, in terms of traditional television. Now, they don't list it here, but there's 2 other places that air in the USA that are both under their umbrella, but much, much smaller distribution. So The Fight Network also airs TNA. I don't know if they show their weekly access show on the Fight Network, but certainly a huge staple of their content is that. Now, in the USA, it's almost minuscule. Talking about traditional cable television, on an upper tier, which I do not subscribe to, Fight Network is available for me on Optimum. And also, they also own Game Plus. So that's available on a premium tier as well, which I don't receive. Two, which shows some TNA content. Again, I'm not sure if that's their weekly show, but fair enough for the USA. Now in Canada, they do spotlight Fight Network, which I'm not sure if they have total distribution in Canada, but I feel it's much stronger in Canada, the distribution on the Fight Network, and Game Plus as well. In the UK and Ireland, Sky, on one of the Sky channels, they have their show airing along with the digital distribution. In Mexico, MVS TV. In India, which is interesting that there's no traditional television listed. We used to hear for years that that was their strongest market or their most valuable market in terms of television rights, but currently that doesn't air anything over traditional television. Recently, they announced Africa, Star Times, which covers, I wouldn't say necessarily much of the continent. I can't say that, but it included many different countries, some larger, I believe, such as South Africa, and some, perhaps smaller in terms of media impact. And the rest of the world, they just listed The Zone, TNA Plus, and YouTube, of course, but also Fight Network in Portugal, Turkey, Bulgaria, Serbia, and Montenegro and Bosnia. They air on their Fight Network platform as well.
Man, TNA is everywhere. I didn't realize they were in all these other countries and markets and different things. So, I mean, that's great for them. The one benefit that I saw of Explosion of doing that again is not only can you make money for it again, maybe put it on YouTube, get those dark matches out there, and maybe create a little interest and just make a little bit of money since you're taping those matches anyway. But that if you're a TNA Plus subscriber, you get them, I think, 3 or 4 days early before everyone else. So I guess it's just another plus if you're a huge TNA fan and you have TNA Plus. Hey, I'm getting all these extra matches before everybody else gets a chance to see them.
Yeah, it's nice to super serve the audience,
Yeah, yeah, yep,
as they would say. And why not? The word I was searching for last a moment ago was economies of scale, right? Like it doesn't cost you much more to do that.
right.
But in terms of where they're scheduled to go next, so Louisiana, often referred to as New Orleans, but Westwego, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, No Surrender, and a Bayou Blast taping on February 23rd and 24th. In Windsor on March 8th and 9th, Sacrifice and Impact. And then Philadelphia on March 22nd and 23rd at the 2300 Arena. So next, I want to stay a little bit in the stats area. Firstly, thank you to Brandon Thurston of WrestleNomics. This comes directly from his State of the Industry report 2023. You can purchase that on the WrestleNomics Patreon or Patreon. I still haven't figured out the best way of saying that. Hopefully, we'll have Brandon on the show to go even more in depth on some of this research. But some of this will include comparisons to WoW and New Japan, just because this week it doesn't lend itself as much to breaking it out to those promotions. So in terms of the viewership, in 2022 as compared to 2023, so for WoW, 2022 they did 272,000, 2023 they did 302,000. And they launched with 100% syndication in the US, and it appears that they continue to maintain that. So continues to be a good story for WoW. And I certainly wouldn't be surprised to see a renewal to a third year, especially when you see the numbers growing year to year. So good for Genie Bus and the team over there. For TNA, in 2021, they did 121,000 viewers. In 2022, 104,000, and 2023 stabilized a bit to 103,000. We'll talk in a moment of how many homes Access TV is in. One would imagine that that has declined year to year. So to maintain consistency is probably actually a win. Um, but for New Japan, they've pretty much been in the same place. Actually, they increased a little bit, so that's a good plus for them. So 2022, they did 53,000 viewers. In 2023, 58,000. So TNA nearly doubling New Japan year to year. So of course, Anthem owns TNA, and pays some sort of rights fee or has some sort of agreement with New Japan to air. So there are advantages to TNA. I don't know. I don't have Access TV, and I don't know if there's like crawlers and ongoing promotion of TNA, and less so for New Japan. I don't know if the hour that it's placed in makes a big difference between TNA having an advantage, or if anything is thought of in that regard. But one would imagine there'd be some advantages to TNA being on Access TV as compared to New Japan. Although New Japan has a greater history on Access TV, and before there was Nielsen ratings, we were getting numbers of like 200,000 viewers and so on. But there was a bigger buzz for New Japan at the time, but then it was off the air for a while until they worked out a deal again for it to return. So TNA has had more of that consistency. But in terms of male versus female viewers, Impact 72% male, 28% female. New Japan 76% male, 24% female. And Women of Wrestling, which we had heard about previously and not surprising, right? 59% male and 41% female. In terms of household incomes, Impact Wrestling, 37,600. New Japan, 41,700, and WoW, 42,800. So sort of kind of the bottom of that as compared to WWE and AEW, which we won't get into at the moment. Purchase WrestleNomics report. And Access TV is currently in 32.4 million homes. Again, less than certainly it had been at its peak, but I'm not sure year to year what the difference is. Now, in looking at some of the social media, Impact Wrestling TNA has more followers than AEW on YouTube and Facebook, which we talk about all the time, at least partly thanks to TNA's earlier founding and adoption of social media. Agreed. On YouTube, Impact, or I should just, it has Impact and TNA, but I just have to get used to saying TNA, has 4.8 million subscribers. New Japan Pro Wrestling, and this is, one has to be careful. This is actually a combination of Japan and Japanese language, and English language. I'm not sure how popular YouTube is in Japan as compared to other platforms, but it's just under 1 million followers, or 965,000. On Facebook, TNA has 2.3 million followers. New Japan has 342,000. On Instagram, Impact has 869,000. New Japan has 405,000. On TikTok, or as I say, TikTok, TNA has 70,000 and New Japan 34,000. That doesn't seem like a number of any note on there. I'm not sure how that goes on TikTok. And on X, TNA has 647,000, which seems a little bit low. And New Japan has 692,000.
Now, as far as all that information, so how would you rank the three? Just as far as popularity and actually people watching.
Sure. So what's always interesting to note is that New Japan viewership number as compared to TNA on Access TV, where TNA doubles it, and it was getting a little bit bleak for New Japan. I wasn't sure where they stood, but New Japan has shown historically, meaning the last few years, that when they have something big to sell, it dwarfs TNA. Certainly working with AEW, who has its own struggles now, but those Forbidden Door shows have been stellar. This Chicago show has been stellar sales. I mean, 4,500. We're seeing from WrestleTix that about a quarter of the tickets are put on resale. So maybe the ticket brokers noticed when it first sold out, I better get in on the second time. I don't believe that they've, as of this recording, have opened up a third round yet. So we'll see that. But San Jose sold out, and a little bit above Vegas for TNA. Not necessarily that those are comparable, but now WoW is just. I don't want to take away anything from their success because they're a different sort of brand. They're basically at the moment just a television syndicated product, and that's a smart thing for them to be, meaning that when they figure out their budgets, when they figure out their plan, they have to figure out, okay, how do we, for our primary source of distribution, and what I would assume would be income, would be how do we appeal to the TNA syndication and a mass market in off prime hours to continue to get renewed, and they've gotten an increase in their ratings year to year. So that's I don't want to make it sound more than it is, but that's pretty amazing. They have some supplemental ways of making money, like they had the special on the CW, which didn't do great. They have some Pluto distribution, they have some international distribution, and they've had some matches, let's say at like what was it, like a television convention or something like that, or appearances, but they're not, and smartly, it doesn't appear anytime soon that they're going to go on the road for their meet and greets. They've done well for a limited amount of tickets on sale, but generally it had been free, and now it's a nominal cost, not nominal, but just to fill up their studio tapings is the priority. For TNA, it's serving their parent company or companies in terms of content and distribution here in the US and abroad as well. They seem to be building a buzz. I mean, look, who did WWE look to? Maybe, as we talked about, based on corporate relationships, but there is still something to that TNA brand name and the talent that they bring, that Jordan Grace could come on there and not be pulled over to WWE side, perhaps contractually as well, but where they could stand alone and spotlight TNA, and whereas New Japan can be spotlighted by AEW, and I think New Japan stars coming out at WWE pay-per-view, certainly, or premium live event. I have to get more used to that, but would certainly get a huge reaction, like an Okada, if he was coming, where it appears he's coming to AEW. Maybe that's solved by the time you hear this. But they have that buzz in the US when there's a big show. So hopefully, John, I answered the question. I think I went on a lot of different tangents there.
Hey, I love it. As far as OVW is concerned, obviously they were all over the news. They have a new investor. They got Mickey James. They're going to start going national. What's the latest with OVW?
Yeah, so a really fascinating article on the Louisville Business Journal behind a paywall. Not necessarily recommending that people do this, but when you go into an article, they let you scroll through it before like they put up that like paywall thing. So
Yep.
I
Oh, yeah.
basically clicked into the article 15 times to be able to get some snippets of it. So I might have missed some important things, but that's just what was available to me at that moment. So we had talked about this new owner or ownership group of or investment group, because there are a number of owners already of OVW. But Genvec Ventures was formed in 2022 by Payer and several partners to invest in struggling companies that lack the proper structure or capital to elevate their business. So perhaps it's not a surprise. I haven't seen the Netflix series yet, John. I'd love to hear from you if you have, but it's defined, I guess the Netflix series defined it in the same way, right? Struggling companies that lack the proper structure or capital to elevate their business. After watching Netflix show, Pierre was convinced they could help OVW. He reached out to Jones, former guest of the show, through Twitter, or two-time guest. And within 3 weeks, a deal was in place. Pierre is now CEO of OVW. Jones remains head of the majority ownership group, and Al Snow is still in charge of the wrestling side of things. Pierre declined to reveal how much Genvec Ventures invested in OVW, but he did say it was substantial, and they have substantial plans for the business. He reached out to Jones. Okay, we talked about that. Let me see. That shine comes off. So we've got to act fast, meaning that after they've been spotlighted by Netflix, I want to scale OVW to a point that it'll be a household name across North America. I want to tour. Snow said OVW generated hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue last year. Now the promotion has to prove that with the right resources and leadership, it can build on the momentum it gained from the show. OVW has already signed new advertising partnership deals with Dan O's Seasoning, I just like that name, Country Boy Brewing, and Irish software company, The Unit. We've talked about that deal a little bit in the past.
Very interesting with OVW, just to see like where they go and how big they can get, because obviously the Netflix rub was huge, and that wrestlers documentary was great. I would highly recommend watching the whole thing, binge it if you will. It's very, very good, very entertaining. Peels back the curtain for sure, but I think that also helped WWE get their deal with Netflix, because they said, wow, like if a small company like OVW can get this kind of rub from Netflix, WWE, which is this billion-dollar company, going to be, tenfold, if you will. So I feel like the OVW definitely helped WWE get that deal.
Yeah, the only shame in something like that, and of course, business is that, when you establish yourself on something like Netflix, like, was there a potential second season coming? And
Right.
does this squash that now? And WWE's like, well, we could do the same thing. You could film it NXT, or maybe we could take those. They have those tryouts with sometimes indie talent, but often like somewhat known, like Olympians, or if NFL people or NCAA athletes, like maybe to take it from a 2-day tryout and spin it into like a 2-week thing. I'm not sure if like everyone has to live in the same house again or something like that, but like, there's a lot WWE could do, and to take away from that. And OVW, maybe they were hoping for, their weekly show to be upscaled a little bit, or maybe additional programming on Netflix. And now, usually, from what we understand, right, WWE likes to sort of be the exclusive content provider for their type of
Yep.
wrestling or sports entertainment. Now, they probably have to be a little bit careful of that now that they've settled, or maybe less so now that they've settled the MLW deal. So I'm curious to see if there's anything else that will come out of Netflix and OVW. But look, CW signed a deal for NXT, and there was that constantly mentioned NWA special, and the WoW special, and the NWA is going to the CW app, which is a different thing, which we'll talk about later. But maybe it's like a little bit of a different world from what I understand. Like UFC doesn't demand exclusivity with MMA, right? Like they have content on ESPN, and so does what was it? World Series of Fighting. I might be behind on the
PFL.
names.
Yeah.
Yeah.
PFL.
So
Yep.
okay, so a professional fighters league, right?
Yep.
I'm probably referring to something long defunct that has content. So like, sort of figure out what works best. It doesn't always have to be exclusive, especially in a world where there's like so many different options.
Now, as far as GCW is concerned, what is going on with them? Because obviously they've got, seems like, maybe I'm wrong, more shows than ever coming up.
Yeah, I have to go back and I have to look at it like from a year to year perspective, but they're certainly super busy. I'm sure it'll be announced if it hasn't already by the time that by the time that people listen to this show. But I did get a little bit of insider news from Brett as to a show that's not yet announced, one that's meaningful to him. My guess on Twitter was fairly accurate, although it was like a broad guess. So if somebody still needs clues, you can sort of like look at the tea leaves and the tweets for that. But just wanted to check in and look at their touring schedule and give a little bit of color to that. I often think about sort of their traditional shows, the typical GCW show with like a cute name to it, usually named after a song or something culturally like that. And then there's like the Jersey JCW shows are, partly GCW, I believe, just owns part of JCW. It's a shared promotion. So that's a different type. And then you have the spring break shows, all those shows over WrestleMania weekend, Bloodsport, which are quite different. Effie's Big Gay Brunch, that's a different sort of brand. But just want to look at sort of their schedule as it unfolds as we know of it right now. So 2 day shot for the Jersey J Cup, which is a smart way of like branding uniquely, and it could get buzz online and I believe through Fight Plus, but it's they don't have to take an expensive venue, but it's sort of upscaling in terms of the talent. I believe was it Great Sasuke is one of the talents who will appear. Hopefully, I'm not mixing it up with someone. So it's sort of like a callback to the Super J Cup from Japan that started all this. February 23rd in Dallas in Gillies. So it looked like tickets are moving along pretty well, especially to start. I don't think that they've moved much since the last time we were discussing that, so that's something to watch. Back to the St. Louis area in Sauget, Illinois, March 1st. That tends not to be a big ticket mover, but as we've talked about with Brett on the show, and we've mentioned over times, it just seems to be a venue and something that works for GCW to keep returning there multiple times a year. But teaming with IWS, again in Montreal, and I think that's IWS's a 25th anniversary show, so that probably will do quite well. It always seems to work out. Returning to Indianapolis, I'm not sure when the last time they were there. I think those were outdoor shows that they had done previously. They've done some indoor shows there before as well, I believe, but March 2nd. I'm curious about this March 9th and 10th shows in Atlantic City. The last couple of times, they didn't seem to do tremendous there. So curious to see there. As they return to Detroit on March 23rd, that got off to a great start. The first couple of shows, softer, it appeared, following that. So something to watch. And then multiple shows, of course, got to maximize that opportunity around the clock for the WrestleMania weekend at the catering hall. So GCW, JCW versus the world. JCW is a standalone. Of what's most interested me, just because I was a huge fan of the style in Japan, but Bloodsport X. Interestingly, Brett had mentioned that he didn't really watch that from Japan. John, sorry, it's one of my favorite promotions, but I'm blanking very hard right now, which was the UWFI, right?
Yes,
Sorry.
yes.
So
Shoot promotion, yeah.
yes, so as which of the amazing Vader, what was it, Takayama matches? No, who was
Takada.
it? Takada, thank you.
Yep.
Those are just amazing. Wish I had the names better in front of me, but as we talked about with Brad a couple years ago, he didn't even watch that. So this is something sort of like coming from a different route. Obviously, Josh Barnett is a gigantic fan of that. So of what they're doing, I'd love to go to like a Bloodsport show sometime. But also they have For the Culture, Joey Janelle Spring Break. It's a 2-day event. So the first one is sold out, GCW versus TJPW, and then of course the aforementioned Big Gay Brunch. Although I don't think they actually serve lunch, so it's a name only.
As far as Mustafa Ali, what's going on with him? Because it seems like he's doing very well right now. Ex WWE superstar Mustafa Ali.
Yeah. So in in terms of our topics, we'll talk about 3 different talents, or at least the first 2 are talents at the moment. So
Right.
he's off to a hot start, as he tweeted. In 1 month, every single show consecutively sold out, record-breaking attendance for promotions, strategic alliances with TNA and New Japan, and most importantly, giving you a reason to believe that in Ali we trust. So sort of I'm not sure if it's a new catchphrase, but one that he's been promoting. But what does this all mean? So he did 6 shows, which is fine, but I don't want to make it more than it is. But it is something, and I think it is great. So he wrestled A.G. Blanc in 19 Frankreich on the 6th. These are all in January. On the 12th, at GCW, Gringo Loco. This isn't all fully attributable to Mustafa, not to take anything away from that. I think the GCW show was on the right track prior to that. But on the 18th, Gringo Loco and Jack Cartwright, a triple threat match for Demand Lucha Plancha Tendencies at Perkdale Hall in Toronto. And then some more shows in Canada, C4 on the 19th, in Preston Event Center in Ottawa, and Center Horizon in Quebec City. He wrestled Leon Saver on the 20th, and then Leon Slater on the 28th in London.
As far as him, he's off to horse, so he's doing good. Another guy that I think has the potential to go to WWE and probably should already been in WWE. What about the Ultimate Oos, Jacob Fatu? What's going on with his free agency?
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan. To me, the most important reason to watch MLW for years, as I thought the Contrafaction was like an amazing group, but a couple of things, and I don't know, and I wouldn't want to speculate on it. I'm sure if it's fully accurate, it's public record, and perhaps it's been shared before. It appeared that there was some potential legal difficulties of some sort, of which I have no idea, in the past that's prevented Jacob from sort of accessing the world of pro wrestling to a greater degree. That's what's been speculated on in terms of getting to WWE at the moment. And perhaps from what we understand of Japanese law, if somebody's had trouble before, it's very hard to get into the country. Now, concurrently, and I don't think Jacob Fatu has himself been tweeting about it or promoting it, as far as I know, but 2 people at the same time, or not too far away from each other, have been. Rikishi, of course, a relative of the famed Anoa'i family, and Booker T have both been pushing to get Jacob Fatu to bigger fields, I guess, bigger ecosystem. So Rikishi had tweeted out, Jacob Fatu, if you know, then you know, has been the baddest talented indie worker on the scene. It's time. Who will sign him? WWE or AEW? He's been ready. The Samoan Dynasty. And then Booker T has been talking about how he's going to be pushing him to WWE, and seemingly Booker T has documented his own legal troubles before as a youth. I believe it was committing armed robbery or a felony of some sort. Hopefully I'm not misrepresenting that, but and eventually making his way to WWE. So sort of explaining, all that situation. I mean, when somebody has been, a model citizen, putting aside maybe a no-show at a some sort of fundraiser or a small independent promotion that seemed to have blown over. I'm not sure if that was pattern behavior or just like a one-off that got a lot of attention. I don't think anyone should have any reason to have any concern about Jacob Fatu not being a valuable addition to any promotion. He's recently gotten a chance with New Japan stateside that I'm not sure how much more that can go. But this all begs the question, and we've dealt with this many times before, as a mainstay of MLW and somebody that has been reported as being under contract, in terms of renewals and so on for a number of years. how can he be promoted as being a free agent unless he is one? And we haven't heard anything from MLW about him being one. So that's the biggest question mark to me at the moment. But I think people are always trying to say, like, okay, the bloodline, this person could be added, that person could be added. I feel a little bit bad for for the champ, the head of the table of the bloodline, not The Rock, but because he has so many family members that want a bigger spotlight and want to earn money, that there's probably a lot of pressure on him
Yeah.
to give them a job. And I don't smartly, WWE has not expanded this to like a bloodline NWO type expansion, or double faction type of thing. It's been um, very tightly, I don't know, regulates the word, but sort of like it stayed with how it is, or expanded a little bit depending on the storyline there. But so I don't know if you'd say Jacob Fatu, okay, put him in the bloodline, but no matter what you do with him, I think it is, not to shade MLW, but it is a shame that somebody that's in the prime of their career for a number of years that can go and doesn't have the opportunity to get more attention, certainly through the independents, and like getting a lot of bookings now at GCW. It's sort of like expanding outside of just. I'm sure he's been out there before, but sort of what appeared to be just MLW and some West Coast promotions of note, but now touring regularly with GCW. I think that's helpful for his career, but he can go so much farther.
Speaking of in trouble with the law, what about Gypsy Rose? What the heck is she doing involved with wrestling?
Yeah, so John, to me, like I think it was a Netflix special, right? Which you have access to. To me, I had never heard the name in my life till early December, till she got out of jail and had like a Bret Hart decal of some sort on her car, and everyone was going
Right.
crazy.
Yep.
And then I was like, read the story, and it's a very tragic story in a number of ways, um, where sort of her mother kept her sick for a number of years, and she was convicted. Hopefully, I'm representing this right as well. Convicted of murdering her mother, and she
Yes.
served a number of years in jail. But it was sort of like, she doesn't seem like a psychopath, right? Because she was put in a very difficult situation. I guess everyone who watches the special, which I haven't, can judge for their own. But she was at St. Louis, I think, with her husband or boyfriend, whomever it was, in the audience. She had a pretty good seat on the floor. So people are taking pictures with her right now. Like the world of wrestling, right? We can go back so many different years where anyone with any notoriety will be used by pro wrestling, whether it's Nancy Kerrigan, there is thoughts of using OJ Simpson, and so on. So why not Gypsy Rose? And she gets a lot of attention now for AEW when you're a challenger brand and sort of trying to be the Burger King to McDonald's. Is that you could get attention for it, but I'm not sure if that's the best use. But like maybe like a GCW. Um, I don't know if it's really appropriate to put her in MDK, right? Like she's more legit than Nick Gage, and
Right.
who's who normally feels more legit than that, because there actually was a person that was murdered, right? Whether you justify that or not, to which she was convicted. But if she wants to be involved in the world of pro wrestling, she probably has offers for other things, maybe a book deal and so on, that she could take advantage of. But in terms of like ongoing work in a field that she's obviously passionate about, I think there's a lot of bookings that she could get in pro wrestling. So something for her to think about.
What's going on? Completely shifting gears. What's going on with the NWA and CW? They're just on the app. That's it.
Yeah, that's as far as we know right now. So February 6th, the various talents are promoting it. So if you're listening on our podcast version, probably it's already migrated there. Um, so the CW app, so they have, as far as I know, in last checking, they have WoW. They'll have the NWA. Um, I don't know. What are their aspirations for the app? Maybe you can use, if NXT isn't on the app, which I haven't heard any talk of it being, you can use your own platform on the CW to say, if you like wrestling, well, look, the CW has the NWA and WOW, and maybe they're looking at something like Fight or DAZN, or I'm not sure if you know IWTV is on the radar at all, but you could build a buzz for your app and your platforms with pro wrestling. So maybe that's part of the play here. But with their Hard Times event, which, in as we talked on the show, from the way that they talked about it and were promoting it, it did appear like it was going to be on the CW. But that's something to be seen, because there's been denials of that, or announced Joe Galley saying that they'd be on, not necessarily Hard Times, but that they would be on the CW, and then NWA having to walk that back. But I think that their event in Dothan, it's a really smart play. The venue for an organization of this size would look great on their broadcast. Like, it looks like a bigger venue than it is, which I talked about on the show, because I think just one of the four sides has like a rise to it, which makes it look sort of like a larger venue than it is. Actually, not the worst venue for AEW to consider, actually, as well. But they've moved, relative to them, a fair amount of rows in terms of the more expensive platinum and gold seats. Plenty of seats available otherwise. I don't think they've opened up some of the larger sections. Perhaps they have a plan to distribute those to vet ticks as needed, or something, fill up that venue. But I think in terms of venue selection, for a premium event, I think a really smart way to go.
What about House of Glory? We're talking about some of maybe the smaller promotions, but they're big time in New York. But it looks like they're going to venture out of New York.
Yes, so this is a promotion we've had our eye on in a while. We know, of course, of their celebrity investment, hooty hoo. But House of Glory, we're taking HOG on the road beginning Friday, April 5th in Philly, which, House of Glory was famed beyond its horizons, beyond New York City, which isn't surprising. Everyone's going to try and be in Philly for WrestleMania. But bring your homegrown talent and the top wrestlers from around the world that you've come to expect from the HOG brand. Where should HOG go next? So certainly not an easy time for promotions to tour, as HOG is thinking about it, and OVW as well. But if you're selective and planned about it, then then you can have some success. HOG has a bit of buzz to it. It seems like they do well in their NYC Arena venue in Queens. So let's see. Swerve Strickland is involved. I think he's the champion now. So if they have access to him regularly, then that should help them as well.
What about CZW? Are you ready? What's going on with CZW?
25 years. Wow, time flies. We often forget that not only were they a death match promotion in the sort of like those years, like in the early 2000s following the death of ECW, but they were actually around during the years of ECW. And speaking about hard times, especially with the growth of GCW, as I often think about it, and we talked about it with Brett in terms of like sharing my opinion of it. Like, when Brad and Nick Gage got in that cage for during a CCW event, whether it was, as Brad said, some people knew about it and so on. It wasn't like totally storming the ring, as far as I understand, but it seemed like that buzz that CCW had was like sucked out, transferred to GCW, and then GCW sort of like took off like a rocket with it.
Yep.
So certainly CCW has a lot lower profile than they've had. So I think it's interesting to look sort of like what's sort of from far outside of day-to-day or even a viewer, sort of like what does it look like? So it appears, and this has been an interesting thing with trademark registration, it appears that their trademarks are not with who we pure. I think they're uh, with the television distribution company that does those like traditional pay-per-views and online events, bloodiest matches, sexiest women, cat fight, all that sort of ilk. So it seems like they have those rights to do that, and GCW just does its thing, but perhaps less than it used to. Or actually, they've increased a little bit in terms of their frequency. So what do they do now? So certainly they'll be in Philly for the WrestleMania weekend. But their Maryland seems to be a strong base of theirs. Havre de Grace, Maryland. They do regular shows at the Limelight, but they did a show in Baltimore, or they will do a show in Baltimore proper. Still haven't left Jersey completely. They did the show, as we talked about, on a battleship in Camden, New Jersey. The Delaware, of course, the Tournament of Death happens on the private farm. So that's how they get away with that. They're in Townsend, Delaware. So they've had their 20th of those shows. And last year, they were in England a little bit. So still doing their thing, albeit with a much lower profile, but they still have a fairly, although not growing as much, a fairly large presence on something like YouTube. So whatever monies are earned from that, probably in terms of the way that they operate, aren't insignificant to their bottom line.
Interesting to see, what happens here with CZW going forward. But final story here. What about Beyond Wrestling?
So beyond talking about promotions that don't have as high a profile, certainly a higher profile than CZW, and still doing their thing with their the weekly shows, which is quite unique and sort of like the tentpole of IWTV, I would say. But the biggest show in Beyond Wrestling history, the biggest show in New England independent wrestling history, one of the biggest independent wrestling shows ever. We're expecting 1,500. A later post said 2,000 paying fans when we headlined the Harpoon St. Patrick's Festival on Friday, March 8th in Boston. So cool to see them doing unique things. Some of those festivals or gatherings, as we saw with Sukiban in Miami, right timing, right place, and right buzz, you can do really well as people are uniquely there to sort of like experience a weekend of events.
Man, Beyond Wrestling still going. CZW is still going pretty crazy that some of these leagues jump, but it's great to see and interesting to see kind of what else pops up in wrestling and maybe who pops up. We're talking about Mustafa Ali being a free agent, kind of going a bunch of different places. Jacob Fatu, and now Mercedes Monet may go to AEW. So interesting right now to see where some of these free agents end up signing officially. So very interesting stuff.
Yeah, Tony Khan has a big announcement. So probably by the time you hear this, that'll be settled.
Yes, another one. Yes, can't wait. But let's hit the plugs. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Two Man Power Trip. Lavi, what do you got?
Yeah, follow me on Twitter at LavieMarg, LavieMarg. And of course, check out our LinkedIn group and join that one, The Business of the Business. And lest we forget, very importantly, we are the official business podcast of PW Ponderings. As of this recording, some of their recent coverage includes Maki Ito returning to GCW, Beyond Talent announcements, and Zack Sabre Jr. And Prestige Wrestling.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. See you right back here next week for a little business of the business. We'll see you next week, folks.